Last week, WGLT reported on the competitive landscape of craft beer makers in Bloomington Normal. This week, we take a swing at trends in brewing itself. Craft beer is all about the flavor. Even after small brewers have found their niche, they keep experimenting, running test batches, and sometimes finding the next big thing their customers like. WGLT's Charlie Schlenker reports on what Bloomington Normal brewers think will be coming next.
Craft brewers are always reconsidering the products they make. Some research batches don't work out. When they do pan out, they work their way into the permanent rotation. The tinkering with recipes is part of the reason they became brewers in the first place. They're also facing competition for younger drinkers who are moving to canned mixed drinks or sparkling hard seltzers. A few years ago, old beer hands didn't think those would stick. It reminded them of a fad called brut beers, which were sparkling. The name is supposed to evoke brut champagne. Brut beers had their moment, but after a couple years they were gone forever. Distill Brewing head of sales Bob Ryan says this time White Claw, Truly, and their ilk are not.
It was looked at that way, but it quickly gained to about 10% share of the malt beverage market and kind of remained there. So the growth may have slowed down, but it remains a big chunk of business, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere.
Brewers are responding to that competitive pressure in different ways. And if you ask 3 brewers what the next big thing in beer is, you may get 6 different answers.
You never really know.
Steve Fiala is the brewmaster at Fiala Brothers Brewing and Beer Hall in Uptown Normal.
I mean, every time you think you know, someone creates a new subsect of a style. Like the latest thing right now is cold IPAs, which are very similar to kind of IPLs, India Pale Lagers, but not quite a lager.
For a while, the pendulum favored hoppy-tasting, high-alcohol IPAs. Illinois Craft Brewers Guild Director Ray Stout says along came hazy IPAs, which cut the bitterness and opened up the segment to people who are not ultra fans of beer. And now?
Because everybody has to wake up and go to work now, people have been gearing towards lower alcoholic beers. The ABV is going down on a lot of products that people are buying. So lagers, especially lighter lagers, are something that has really grown. We're making a ton of really great ones right here in Illinois. We've kind of become the lager hub of the Midwest.
Beer geeks swear by the German beer purity law called the Reinheitsgebot. It's more than 500 years old and decrees that beer must be made from water, barley, and hops, and only hops, barley, and water. Steve Fiala says he thinks you will see the Belgian beers start to pop again. Fans may also yearn for the return to popularity of German-style beers. Distills Bob Ryan says those will always have a base and a place, but market share, not so much.
With the proliferation of really expanding flavor palettes with consumers and being more accepting of fruit and all kinds of things in beers and going off into directions of having milkshake beers and some really off-the-wall concepts, that the idea of traditionalism, I'm afraid that people aren't really attached to that as much lately.
Some of those off-the-wall ideas include sparkling hop water and no-alcohol beer with a craft taste that have begun to pick up. Another is adding CBD or cannabis to beer. You can't do that in most states. Ray Stout of the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild says Minnesota is providing the great experiment on that for the rest of the nation. Steve Fiala of Fiala Brothers Brewing and Beer Hall in Uptown Normal says, say it isn't so.
I've thought this for a few years now, but I still believe it. I think we're going to see a little bit of a gravitation back towards classic styles, just because, in my opinion, it's kind of gotten silly with all of the adjuncts that have been thrown into beer at this point.
Distill Brewing's Bob Ryan says there is some movement back toward traditional American IPAs, not hazy, what he calls West Coast style. He thinks as the pendulum swings, brewers could go back to their roots. Ciders made from fruit might seem to be an answer to the younger drinkers' light and sweet craving they find in hard seltzers. Brewers at Fiala Brothers and Keg Groove and Casper Brewing in Bloomington say ciders are popular, but they have 1 or 2 on draft and not 4 or 5. Bob Ryan says after the initial surge from larger brands like Angry Orchard and Woodpecker, that segment contracted and stabilized. It is a niche.
And on the other hand, we do see some good craft cideries emerge. They do gain a foothold and they have wonderful products. They seem to build to that. But what we don't really see is getting beyond that level that they've achieved.
There are new frontiers in beer with ancient and new genetically tailored yeasts, though Fiala says it's hard to say whether any new yeast will be substantially different from a yeast that has already been used to make beer somewhere in the world.
It's no different than the way that kind of malts and grains have been, altered by genetics to make the process easier, and that's all that's really happening there. They're helping cut down off flavors that can develop in the fermentation processes and stuff.
Others believe the next 5 years of yeast development and rediscovery will be amazing. Dave Casper of Casper Brewing says some of the new hazy or juicy IPAs use genetically modified yeasts. They are thiolized strains. That means they can break down parts of the grain and hops to produce more intense flavors. And Ray Stout of the Craft Brewers Guild says Illinois is poised to lead in that space.
We are very lucky to have some of the best yeast research in the country happening in Chicago at Omega Yeast Labs. There is a lot going on in the yeast space right now, especially when it comes to avoiding off flavors in beer or, getting the proper haziness. And, all of that comes from the proper pitching of the yeast and proper yeast strains.
Some are also interested in heritage strains of yeast. Dave Casper says particularly some from Norwegian farmhouse beers passed down from generation to generation.
They ferment at temperatures that would normally spoil a beer. One that comes to mind is called Voss, Voss. It is a different genetic strain. It's not a lager or quite an ale. It's something else. These will ferment in like 2 or 3 days, all the way down to terminal gravity.
Casper says you ferment these at 90 to 95, sometimes 100 degrees, and some produce very interesting flavors.
Voss, for instance, when you ferment it very warm, puts off a nice orange aroma.
Steve Fiala says saisons and farmhouse ales are also trending. All of these things may be part of the beer answer to hard seltzers and mixed drinks. But Bob Ryan of Distill says sometimes craft brewers do have to play catch up.
Tried to produce some really nice craft seltzers that sort of follow the line of what our fruited sours are, having a nice fruit presence in there, a little bit of tartness, and joining them in the fray.
Distill makes a strawberry lemonade sour seltzer, which does fairly well, Ryan says, especially in warmer months. However, the next few years shake out, though. Dave Casper of Casper Brewing says you can find whatever you favor, from hazies to IPAs to German, Belgian, and sours. None of the craft brewers in the Twin Cities are like each other, and Casper says that makes Bloomington Normal an interesting place for a beer lover to come and visit. I'm Charlie Schlenker.